I once worked for a guy who joined a special group of leaders in his position because they're the only ones who understand him.
Hey, tell me more.
Welcome back to Tell Me More with me, CJ Quarterbaum. Tell Me More exists to help us figure out the gaps in transformational intergenerational leadership by focusing on Gen Z leadership and then preparing for the future. Today, we're going to talk about leadership. And we're going to continue kind of this series we've been down a little bit, and we're going to talk about why humility is the most important leadership trait that you can have. This is why humble leaders win. Pride comes before the fall. This is ancient wisdom that we've believed for thousands of years because we understand something there. That when we get too, as they would say, big for our britches, when we start to believe our egos too much, that it eventually leads to our downfall. Nobody wants to follow the prideful leader. In fact, we look for leaders who exhibit humility. We look for leaders who are the ones that we can trust. Humility has to be at the core of your leadership, at the core of who you are. Humility is a strength. It is not a weakness. I guess that leads us to the question, what is humility? Humility is not thinking less of yourself. It's not pretending that what is true isn't true. You can be proud of your accolades, of what you've accomplished, of the work that you've done. Humility isn't suddenly taking this woe is me kind of mentality. Humility is thinking of yourself less. Humility is the ability to be a sacrificial leader. It is recognizing that you have faults and flaws. It is I would say the care and concern, showing a care and concern for your people. That's what a humble leader does. Humility is creating an atmosphere of psychological safety for those who follow you so that they can be the best workers that they can be. Some people think that they don't need humility in leadership. They think to themselves that I am where I am because of who I am, and therefore you just need to get in line and follow me. You know, there's great examples of this. I'm reading this book, Mindset, by Carol Dweck right now, and it's about this idea of a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. And she profiles a lot of different leaders, and she'll point to someone like a Lee Iacocca, who was the CEO of Chrysler, and how his style of leadership, this fixed mindset style of leadership, made him the star. He was the central player. He was the main character in the story, and everyone else just needed to get in line. That kind of leadership doesn't have space for new ideas. That kind of leadership feels a sort of weight and pressure that makes them think they have to always have the answer. And because of that, Chrysler pretty much ended up failing. Because while he achieved some short-term success, he did not have what it took to keep Chrysler at the top of their game. Now, you contrast that with someone, a leader who has a growth mindset, like Jack Welch. Jack Welch was the CEO of GE. GE General Electric, when I think of GE, I think of refrigerators, but they're in all sorts of spaces. But when Jack Welch got there, and I'm going to fudge the numbers because I don't have the book in front of me, but he basically took them from being a $4 billion company to like a $40 billion company or something like that. He basically took them to the moon. And a part of what made his leadership so great and so inspiring, and why people still look at Jack Welch today as a model for leadership, was his humility. Jack knew he didn't have all the answers. And he would say that loudly and boldly and would say, it's okay because I surround myself with the people who do. Jack was known for getting into the trenches and visiting factories all across the country to hear what line workers had to say. What they thought, from their position on the ground, what were they seeing that he couldn't see from up in his perch? That is humble leadership. If you're a person who says, I'm the leader, everyone should just follow me. You have to understand that your position extends beyond competency. It's not just what you do, it's also who you are. There is a level of emotional intelligence that is necessary in order to be a good leader. And I argue that starts with humility. Truth is, humble leaders are easier to follow. Humble leaders recognize that they don't have all of the answers, and that's okay. Humble leaders lean on their teams. They trust the people that they've hired to do the jobs that they were hired to do. And in fact, they make space for them to grow, to challenge themselves, to discover new things. These leaders don't feel the need to be right all the time about everything. They don't create a crisis out of everything. They exhibit a steady hand. Humble leaders create an atmosphere for ideas to flourish. Have you ever been in a room and when everyone's kind of pitching ideas and then the leader walks in and suddenly it's hushed tones? Suddenly everyone gives their idea and they're immediately looking at the leader like, hey, is this okay? Is this acceptable? Versus when the leader's not in the room and it's like an ideas bonanza. Everyone's throwing out ideas. Everyone feels comfortable. That speaks to psychological safety. Humble leaders, because they allow other ideas to flourish, they create an atmosphere of psychological safety for their people. Humble leaders have less pressure. If everything rises and falls with you, that is a terrible weight to carry. But if you recognize that success is a team endeavor, you are now equipped to let your people flourish. You lead them well. You probably sleep better at night. You're probably taking better care of yourself because you know that this is not all on me. And yes, you are the leader. And there is a weight that you carry that is unique in your position, but you recognize that it's not all on you. If you have a spirit of collaboration, then you are recognizing that success rises and falls with the team. What you won't do is create an us versus them mentality. You see, leaders who are not humble tend to be divisive. I once worked for a leader who joined a special cohort of leaders just like him because they're the only ones who understand what he goes through. But what do you miss in that moment? If you join a group of managing directors, you're all managing directors, what are you all going to say about the associate director? You bring an issue and say, hey, my AD has got this problem, my SVP's got this problem, and you and all your other MDs together are going to look and say, well, you know what they're like. But what you miss in that moment is a different vantage point. When you isolate yourself and you say, only these people can understand me because these people are in my position, what you miss in that moment is an intellectual and an experiential vantage point that you don't have. This is what made Jack Welch such a great leader. Is he would go down to the factories, the place that he had, you could argue, no business in, the place he was so disconnected from. And he recognized those factory workers see things that I don't. They understand things that I don't. And there are things that I can learn from them. I'm going to butcher this quote as I do many, if you've been following along, but it's something like the most important person in the company is 5 steps below the CEO. And what that is speaking to is that is the person who is on the ground, who is in the trenches. See, what often happens to us as leaders, and I've been guilty of this, is we kind of sit from our perch up there and we go, I know what's best for you. I know what you need. But we're doing that in a vacuum. We're doing that not realizing that the weight of our decisions has an effect. That there are people who are impacted by the decisions we make. So I would say to you, leader who is feeling a ton of pressure, who's feeling a ton of weight, that perhaps you should get down into the trenches. See what people are going through down there. Hear what they have to say. Hear their opinions. It doesn't mean that you do whatever they say and you just have to blindly follow their suggestions. But what do they see that you don't? Humble leaders create an atmosphere where people can thrive. Again, this is the idea that it's not all on you. Humble leaders are going to look at their people and figure out, how can I get the most out of you? I don't know if you're familiar with the Strength Finders exam, but essentially it's one of those personality tests that help you figure out what are your top 5 strengths. So the first time I took this test, and the answers will change, I think, like with most of these things over time and where you are and your current positioning. But the first time I took it, one of my biggest strengths was developer. I see in people what they may not see in themselves. I see the potential of what they could be. And so I've kind of always had this spirit of development in me, where I see people, and I think a part of this is why I love being an educator, is I see where you are, and I like the idea and the process of moving you to a new place, of getting the most out of you, of helping you be the best version of yourself. Now, this could be some confirmation bias, but as I'm reading mindset, growth mindset leaders have a development plan for their people. Growth mindset leaders are always looking at the ways in which they can help their people flourish, get the most out of them. They see them as, hey, you're here with me today, but you might be doing great things in the future, and I want to help you get there. Fixed mindset leaders, when polled, often have no development plans for their people. I once worked for a guy who we had overlapping skill sets and giftings, and he kept saying to me, I need to find other places to put you because you're too much on my corner. Our skills overlap too much. And so rather than see me as a compliment, he saw me as an adversary. He saw me as a threat. Egos can get in the way of productivity. I had another situation where I was interviewing for a job, and I really liked the guy that I was interviewing with. I'm like, man, me and this guy, we can kick it. So now we're getting to that point of the interview where you're starting to ask maybe some of the more like personal questions, just about life, who you are. And I asked him, I said, who are you outside of the job? And he looked at me and he said, there is no me outside of the job. This is all I ever wanted to do, all I've ever wanted to be. I eat, sleep, breathe this. All of my red flags went up, every single one of them. Because if this is how you view the job, that this is your identity, then what will you do to protect it? What will you do to keep it? Who will you snuff out? Who will you step on so that you can maintain your place of power and position and authority? Humble leaders don't view their jobs as their identity. Work is what you do. It's not who you are. Humble leaders don't see themselves as the standard. Humble leaders don't have a my way or the highway mentality. They recognize that different is not wrong. It's just different. And they look at the vantage point of others, or they look at someone's way of doing things that might not be how they would have gotten there, as okay as well. They look at that as, man, we have the same objective, the same goal, and I would get there this way. But if you're getting there in an efficient manner, in a good manner, in a way that is not against our company values, and you're still getting there, I can recognize that that's okay. Humble leaders don't look at the different gifts and skill sets of others as inferior. They view them as strengths. They see what other people bring to the table and they welcome it with open arms. The egotistical leader thinks that their way is the only way, that their way is the best way. But that's just not true. How outside of math, which I'm not a math guy, so math people drop in the comments and tell me if I'm wrong. But I feel like there's only one way to solve equations. Now, if I'm wrong and there's multiple ways to solve equations, then where is it true in life that there's only one way to do things? One right way. The worst leaders try to make everyone else into their own image. The worst leaders look at you and who you are in your uniqueness and in your gifts and your skills and your abilities, and they say to you, you need to be me. I once had this job where I had to give these quarterly presentations. Everyone dreaded the quarterly presentations because the boss wanted them to be done in his style. His way was the only way. And it's not that his way conformed to a certain set of standards, it was just his preference. And what would really mess with you is me and my colleagues, we would give these quarterly presentations, and the higher ups, the people that we had to present these to, they would love them. But the feedback we would get from the manager was, well, you didn't do it my way. It's not what I would have done. That can really, really mess with you, because you've been told what you've done is good. What you've done is right. It achieved the goal. But then what you're hearing on the back end is, well, it's not my way. And my way is the only way. See how that can be an issue? Do you see how that kind of leadership can fracture people, keep people from flourishing, keep them from being the best version of themselves? Most importantly, how it keeps them from growing, how it keeps you as a leader from growing. If you think that you figured it out and you've got it all together, then chances are you are not being introspective enough to look at yourself and say, hey, how can I be better? What can I do differently? Humility is an ongoing process. Humility is something that we walk through and fight to be every single day for the good of our teams, and for the good of ourselves, and the good of the people in our lives. Because how you do anything is how you do everything. And if you show up to work egotistical and prideful, then how are you showing up at home? How are you showing up with your friends? What pride does is it gives us this false sense of belief that we are the standard and that everyone needs to conform to us. And what happens in that moment, like with those quarterly presentations, is your team stops listening to and they stop trusting your feedback. And if your team feels like they can't listen to or trust you, you are never going to get them to follow you in the ways that you need them to. You're never going to get their trust in the ways that you hope to have it. So what do we do from here? How do you grow in humility in your leadership? I think the first thing you can do is solicit feedback. And this is going to be hard. None of us like to be criticized. None of us like to hear the ways in which we're failing and doing wrong. But if we seek to grow, then we have to get the honest feedback. Now, let's not pretend that we don't understand what power dynamics are. Because I once had a working situation in which the overwhelming majority of the staff was disgruntled and upset, and could be described as on the brink of quitting. And so I brought this to upper management and I said, hey, we've got a problem here. We've got a morale problem, and how do we fix this? So he calls an all staff meeting, all hands on deck. And now this is the same one who loved to berate people. And so he goes, I hear you all have a problem. If you got a problem, speak up right now. Who's going to feel comfortable speaking up in that moment? Who's going to feel like, yeah, I can do this. I can voice all of my grievances and frustrations? No. So you might have to solicit anonymous feedback. You might need to hire an outside consultant to come in and check the health of your organization and of your staff and get that real feedback that you need in order to grow. And if you need someone who can come in and do that for you, you're looking at your guy right here. Shoot me an email. Go to my website. DM me on Instagram, whatever. But I would love to come and help transform your organization, to help see you be the best leader that you can be. I offer consulting packages, executive coaching packages for this very thing. But what we don't need to do is continue in the mess that we've been in, is continue to be a less than full version of ourselves. But in order for us to do that, we have to check our egos at the door. We have to push the pride aside and say, I'm humbly coming to be the best version of myself that I could possibly be. But listen, you just listen to all of that and you might think to yourself, CJ, you are dead wrong. I don't need to exhibit humility in my leadership. I am who I am, and that is it. And to you, I say, what do I know? I'm just some guy from Brooklyn.